Hi Raji, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. I One of the main reasons I really wanted to speak to you is because I feel like you have a lot of answers for what the world needs, and I know you're an author, and a lot of people know about your work. But today I really want to discuss and hear from you about you as a philosopher. So,
I initially all I cared about was being an artist of sorts, and I chose novel writing, and that was my path. And then at the same time, I became very political, as perhaps quite a few people do in their early 20s or late teens, and that was sort of, it was if my ship was sailing and these strong political winds were blowing it to one side. It was sort of going askew to an extent, and it took me many years to realize that all of this politics, this political striving, was actually a form of spiritual striving in disguise, in a way. And then I was trying to find a way of making sense of the world and of my place in the world, and trying to find redemption, I think, from tremendous guilt, and trying to find meaning from total confusion, and perhaps misguidedly thinking that if I could find a political solution to the world's problems, then maybe I could solve my own problem of, well, it's the same problem that everybody has of unhappiness, suffering, misery. That didn't work. And at around 32, I had a nervous breakdown after my first meditation course, when I flipped. I flipped from the political to the spiritual, from the outside to the inside. And then I sort of started again from square one, but now working entirely on myself, just healing. It was, okay, I'm sick, I'm wounded, I'm desperate, I'm psychologically in tremendous pain and trouble. Everything is wrong. I don't know why. I'm traumatized. I can't make sense of my childhood. Let me go back to square one and try and sort that out. And that was really 15 years of that. And becoming less political all the time and more sort of me-centered. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. And then that I kind of reached a point where I thought, yes, of course, I'll be doing healing work for the rest of my life, but I now feel stable enough to do two things. And one was to have a child, which has become the most important thing in my life. I felt ready and stable in order to do that. And also, yeah, and I felt that I'd come out of this very severe trauma, not entirely, but the trauma was integrated, let's say.
right.
I was almost fully aware of what it was. Yeah, I mean, you can never say never, because the dark corners of your psyche, by definition, you don't know they're there. And then the second thing that came along with that was I wanted to re-engage with politics and also start to share the things that I'd been learning for 15 years. I read somewhere, it could have been the Ramayana actually, that teaching is an essential stage of learning, and it felt like I needed to flip that and start to share the things that I'd learned. I never thought that I would do that. I would see people declare themselves spiritual teachers after they'd done a few retreats or something, and after a couple of years, and I thought, I'm never going to be one of those people. I'm just going to keep working on myself. But it just happened organically, automatically. I suddenly realized, okay, now I'm in a position where I can start to reverse the lens a little bit. So that's really where I'm at.
So,
Yeah, and so it was also, yeah, a kind of re-entry into politics as well, because I don't think you can separate all these different aspects of life: the spiritual, the psychological, the therapeutic, parenting, politics, culture, art. They're all together. But I think I needed that time off from politics just to give myself a rest. And you can't try and affect change if you're such a wreck inside. So I think that I was healed enough to re-engage without it being harmful to me.
but do you also feel sometimes that we have to be a wreck inside to make that change? Because I feel that sometimes, at least for me, I had to go through that
Mm.
journey. But Anyway, that's just a thought. But
Maybe. I'm sure
yeah,
it's different for everybody. I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about intergenerational trauma, and that was actually something that I was going to ask you next. How does when you went on this journey of self discovery, if you may, how did you navigate the family relations where you kind of realize that okay, maybe there might have been some intergenerational trauma in your own family, and how did you perhaps address and accept and create compassion for each other within your own family, and how may others do the same?
Well, I think compassion came towards the end, actually. At the beginning, it's just the shock of this realization that you've been traumatized by your parents, and if not mistreated, and that your needs weren't met, that there was cruelty, if not abuse, uh, and that was almost certainly done to them, and that it's quite a dark past and a dark history, and
Yeah.
it goes back several generations, and a lot of it you don't know. Some of it I knew, some of it I could guess, some of it I will have no idea about till the day I die. For a while at the beginning, I was trying to piece it all together, the jigsaw puzzle of family history, but you'll only ever get, well, who even knows how small a fraction of the whole you you can see. But the trauma is in your body and
Yeah.
in your mind, in your whole structure, your physical and psychological structure, and you know it, and you know it's there. So whatever else you don't know, you may not know the why and the how, but you know the trauma. So I think the first stage was that realization, and there was a lot of anger came with that, and horror and fear, uh, because you want to believe that your parents they know what they're doing, that they're in control, that they're godlike in their level of stability and knowledge, and suddenly you realize that they weren't. They're not. They're
Mm.
just people, and a lot of them are stuck at quite early developmental levels. They've had
Yeah.
trauma at young age, which has trapped them in different stages of their emotional development. So maybe a lot of the time they didn't know what they were doing, and that's why your needs weren't met, and that's why they were cruel to you. And that realization was really hard, but you need to go through that so that you know that all the things they told you weren't true, and then you can start to figure it out for yourself. So
Mm.
I went through all of that. There was anger, horror, shame, guilt. All the feelings came up, and you're being buffeted all the time. It's like a pendulum. Whose eyes are you seeing yourself through? Whose truth is right? Your own truth is combating against your childhood conditioning, and that results in huge quantities of guilt. And I went through that pendulum process for a long time, constantly doubting myself, then coming back to myself, then doubting myself, and the pendulum just sort of swings and swings and swings until it's not swinging very far anymore, or until it's swinging barely perceptibly. It still swings a little, but not very much. But at the beginning, there was those huge swings until I came to a sort of equilibrium, and it was when you can come to some sort of equilibrium and look at it calmly,
Mhm.
without judgment.
Yeah.
The judgment will be there so long as you're in the grip of that trauma. But when the trauma is loose enough, then the judgment isn't there, and you can look at it equanimously, objectively, and say, well, just that's what happened. It was nobody's fault. There's nobody to blame. And once you've reached that stage, then you've reached the stage of forgiveness, and then compassion comes in automatically. Um, but it requires a lot of compassion for yourself to get there, and usually that's the part that's most difficult, because you wouldn't be in this mess if you'd been taught compassion for yourself.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, that rings very true for me as well. I just want to soak that in for a second. um, I wanted to steer gears a little bit and really talk about your experiences with maybe your family, and as well as patriarchy as you experienced it being a South Asian male, and maybe how that might have impacted your writing, and as well as your experiences now with fatherhood.
Okay, that's quite a lot.
I know it's like two of them put together, but you can split it.
Well, should we stick to the patriarchy thread, the masculinity patriarchy fatherhood thread? That's quite an interesting one. Um, well, my mother was very anti-men. That's a big problem for me. And it caused me enormous harm. But it also enabled me to actually look critically at masculinity. It was both. Sometimes you can gain something that is given to you very unskillfully. But then I also had to undo all of the damage of self-hatred and viewing masculinity as a negative thing. I think that was the problem. I think a lot of men are in that situation now. More sensitive men are starting to say, okay, this is a fact, this fact of patriarchy, or this phrase toxic masculinity, which is used a lot. But does that mean that I'm innately bad? Does that mean men are innately bad? Does that mean masculinity is innately bad? And any man who comes to that conclusion can't heal. They'll be self-hating for forever. And they'll be trying to compensate for this sort of original sin and guilt by doing more and more dysfunctional things. And it doesn't work. So eventually, I think in order to be a father, I had to first stop having any sort of negative view of men and myself and masculinity, and recognizing that we all have equal value, that we're all capable of harmful or healing deeds. Our actions are our responsibility, and our sociology doesn't dictate our moral value. And that was very important because I needed to be able to not put that onto a boy child or a girl child in reverse. You need to love unconditionally without any sort of preconception and without holding anyone guilty, or without, pinning the sins of the past onto a newborn child. That's a thing that I think a lot of parents do. They often put their anger onto their parents onto their own child, and that's tremendous. Or their anger with their partner, but often their parents, that's the one that goes unnoticed a lot of the time, and it's a tremendously dangerous thing to do. So I had to kind of start from a clean slate, and a clean slate means self-love. Yeah. And if you can do that, then you're able to love the child unconditionally, so that so that you're not judging your child. That's incredibly important.
And this question I had not planned, but how do you not end up emulating what you may have seen with your parents? Because we end up modeling our parents' behavior, right? So when you are a parent yourself, how do you separate yourself from what you saw while growing up, and then be a different person and a different parent to your child?
Well, I mean, it's all the years of meditation and therapy have meant that I'm aware that there'll be a voice in my head sometimes urging me to behave in the way that they did. But because I'm conscious of it, sometimes it's a little stronger than other times, but because I'm conscious of it, I cannot do what it's telling me to do. I can continue to move from my for my own volition, being the kind of parent that I want to be, rather than reacting that kind of strongly conditioned reaction pattern. But I'm always aware of it. I'm aware of it all the time.
Your conscience, yeah.
Well, no, it's like it's the ego, actually, is what it is. Oh. It's the urgings of the ego to create havoc and to judge and to be unkind, and the ego takes many forms. The ego can appear in different voices and different forms. It's like a chameleonic, shape-shifting little genius devil in your head. And I guess years and years of practice have just brought me to a point where I'm aware of its voice, and I'm with my son, I don't react to it. Right. I'm very glad about that, and wouldn't have wanted to have children if that was not the case.
Yeah,
which is why I'm so old.
I'm still deliberating whether to have a child or not, but I do want to be a parent, but there's a lot of talk going on in my family. Anyway, but
well, I'm 50 years old, right?
I know you do. Yeah. And
it took me a little while.
I'm 34, so anyway, so I actually, you did mention this earlier, and I wanted to sort of circle back to that. You also say that you like to stress the intersection of politics and spirituality, and I believe the exact phrase that you used is that we need healed warriors, healed activists, and healed healers in politics. So But I guess my question really is, what is the path to achieving this?
Well, mine was just a sort of random series of accidents almost. Things just came my way. I had no idea what I was doing for a large part of it. And then slowly things started to take shape. But now I can look back at it and see a trajectory. But at the time, it's just, just wandering through a labyrinth. Oh, I'll go over here. Oh, look, there's that thing over there. So I started with Vipassana meditation. And that's been a real blessing. It's been a guide from the beginning. And the first retreat I did gave me an instant level of self awareness I hadn't had before, which was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And so because of that, just one second, because of that, I had to have therapy, or I was gonna go
Yeah.
under. I
Mm,
was in real trouble for a while. So then
right.
I started having regular therapy. I had different therapists. They were okay, but they got me through that period.
Mm,
Then I found my regular therapist, cognitive analytical therapy, or cognitive analytic therapy, which, and he and I have been seeing each other for many years. He was great. And I continued to do a lot of meditation, Vipassana, and I had some residencies in Zen centers and did some various other things. But then from that point, I became very, very serious meditator. And I was following those Buddhist precepts, no intoxicants, and so on. And it's quite strict with myself.
mm,
Um, and then all that sort of got disrupted a little when I first drank ayahuasca, which I was not going to do because it sounds like an intoxicant. But then I met someone on a Vipassana course who told me what it was, and I was like, wow, okay, I can't go through my life without trying this. And that opened me up to all the other psychedelics, which I'd used as a teenager. But to me, they were sort of recreational drugs. They were mind blowing, but they were But this was the word drug has no place in my vocabulary when talking about psychedelics. I don't want to. Obviously, they are drugs, but I don't want to confuse anyone, you know, into thinking that I'm talking about recreational drugs. So I'm talking about as a therapeutic and spiritual aid, um, almost a sacrament. So I used various different substances to sort of as catalysts on that healing path.
mm,
And there's a point in which the therapeutic and the spiritual, it's hard to separate them. And I reached that point, and I had a psychedelic therapist who who would guide me with different substances, including MDMA. My MDMA therapy was very valuable to me, and I used LSD and mushrooms and DMT um, in conjunction with all of this meditation and reading, spiritual reading, and so on, and spending a lot of time in the forest during lockdown. During lockdown, a lot of time in the forest with psychedelics, and I came out of all of that kind of ready to have children. So that was those were all the different things that I used, and lots of other little things besides. I
yeah.
was just sort of open to everything, and at different points in my life, different teachers appeared and helped me. It was a sort of Winnie the Pooh, and there's this book, The Tao of Pooh, and the thing about Winnie the Pooh is he just sort of wanders around aimlessly, not knowing what he's doing, but things always work out. Looking back in it, it was a bit like that.
But that's
It
because
was
he was doing the wandering. If he just sat there, maybe he would
yes.
not discover those things. I
I
feel
also said yes to anything that anyone offered me. I decided, okay,
yeah,
this
so
is
you
a
were
gift.
open. You were open
I
to
was
experiences.
completely open. I was completely open. But I also had nothing to lose. Now I have a son, so I'm maybe a bit more conservative. But then I was completely open.
Right. Uh, so I also saw a video where you were talking about the concept of the myth of the nation, and that really it 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 really interested me a lot to ask you about this, because that's where you say where nations are a construct, but I feel that for a lot of us it's easier said than actually implemented. So how do you think it's possible for our present civilization to unlearn centuries of our own wrongdoings? Because there's just so much of wrong that we've been doing, that we continue to do on our globe. So how do we get past this?
Are we talking about the myth of nations still? Well, I mean, it depends which nation we're talking about, but none of them are very old.
I don't know. You can pick anyone, but since I'm from India, I will pick India.
But I mean, India as a nation is not very old, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there are references.
It's not very old, so it doesn't. I know that does not.
There are references to a sort of
pick
wider.
the one that maybe colonizes the other ones.
Well, I mean, even the sort of modern nation state of Britain is not that old. I mean, there's Alfred the Great's Britain, but was that Britain or was that just a section of it in the same way? So I think these concepts are constantly updated, but they want you to think they're old concepts.
But how do we break away from those concepts? Even if we have boundaries, we have nations, we have a certain way politics works. It's just how do we look beyond that? For example, when somebody like I stay in Canada, so here there's and I think talks about immigration are there rampant all over the world. When people come in, go out, someone or the other always has to say something about it. But how do you? How can we be more accepting of each other as human beings, really, not having borders? I know this.
Well, I think it's the self-awareness thing again. If the more self-aware you become, the more you can see that you're not Indian or British or American, that these are just labels and constructs which have been put onto you, but they have nothing to do with your essence. And you can relate to people as an aspect of the same consciousness,
right?
As a fellow human
being,
and you can see that that's what the other person is, and that all of these labels are not that important. They're superficial, they're surface. But I think it's the more you're able to look at yourself and see who you are, then you can see it in the other. I think that's the way that it works.
Yeah, it's more just that self-identity with that nation and with that. Yeah.
Well, I think if you have a weak sense of self, or a weak sense of self-awareness, low self-awareness, and usually that's combined with quite a lot of self-hatred often. It's not wanting to look at yourself because of your shame and guilt and fear of what you might see, this monster. You push a lot of yourself into shadow. And if that's the case, then you're much more likely to cling on to labels. And, then you could say, yes, I am a Canadian. I'm wonderfully liberal and I enjoy the outdoors and I'm not like those American barbarians. And, you start to feel good about yourself, but that's not, it's just, it's all a little silly. This is not really who you are. Or you could say, it doesn't matter. I mean, you say,
it might make you feel better. It might make you feel better about yourself for some time, but
it makes you feel better, but in a very fragile way.
Yeah.
Because it's not true, and somebody can pop it at any time, and then you get defensive, and then you get aggressive, and then you get abusive. So it's
one trigger, and that's it.
Yeah. So I think the answer is to just keep asking yourself these questions: Who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Right.
And to look deeper, and to start to look at those things that you're afraid of looking at your own shame and your own fear and your own sort of self-dislike, to be able to look at it and work with it. And that takes a little work. So
I when you mention about these things where we kind of like don't talk about certain things, that's kind of also what I wanted to ask you about. So when we experience like these things in our families, for example, like I have a diagnosis and I have a mental health diagnosis, and there's this label and everything. But often what ends up happening within family systems is, and also maybe with the taboo and all the stigma, although I don't like to use that word because it's overused, but how do we create conversations? How do we create certain things and talk about them openly without fear, aggression, getting hurt, and really from a place of love and in a way to connect with each other? How do we strike those conversations? Because I feel that the lack of conversations and constantly suppressing our emotions and masking our emotions and hiding our emotions and wanting to give that impression that we're all on cloud nine when really on some deeper level a lot of us are suffering. I mean, look at what's happening with social media now. Everyone's just posting the happy pictures. So I think that really we need an answer for this. How do we cope with this? How do we create those environments where you feel a sense of being safe, you feel a sense of belonging? These are all things that are taught to me as an educator, that we want children to feel that way. But I feel that a lot of our adult children are not feeling that.
Well, I think the first step is to do your own healing work so that you're working with your own shame. Because if people are judging you for having a mental health diagnosis or having an addiction or being fired from your job for incompetence or getting pregnant at 15 or whatever it is, right? Or having a boyfriend they disapprove of, or being gay, or the list goes on, right? If you yourself feel ashamed of that, then everything becomes very difficult.
The self-stick, you got done.
Yeah. And you're going to attract people who judge you as well, and you won't be able to protect yourself from them. So the first stage is to look at the shame inside of yourself and to find self-forgiveness. But there's actually nothing to forgive, but you have to reach the point where you realize there's nothing to forgive.
Because you have to be so accepting of it that it's non-existent.
And just recognize you're a human being. This is what we do.
Yeah.
Everybody is addicted to something. Everybody makes mistakes. Life is some kind of mental illness. Everybody, every day we screw up and do terrible things, or, well, no, we don't do terrible things every day, but every day we screw up and make mistakes, and we can do terrible things, or just being human, what you described is just being human. That's it, but if you're required to live up to an impossible standard, then it becomes you're failing at being human, whereas you're not, because failure is the entire essence of what it is. This is the realm of imperfection, right? This is the realm of suffering. It's the that's what it is. So, and to recognize that everyone else is in the same position. But it's dangerous to talk about these things when you're still in the grip of all of that shame and fear, because then you start oversharing and being very open, and then people hurt you, and you don't know what to do with that. So I think at the beginning, you find the people you can talk to about it without being judged, and if you can't, then just and then by the time you've come out of that shame and you're really genuinely self-loving and self-accepting, then you kind of know who you can talk to and who you can't, and you may just talk to someone who'll judge you anyway and not care, right? But before then, if someone judges you or speaks harshly to you, you will care when you're still carrying that shame, and it'll hurt. It'll really, really hurt, and you'll just get more and more and more hurt. So, for that period, I would advise being quite guarded, and you only need one or two people to be able to talk to at the beginning.
That's true.
I think.
Yeah.
And one, hopefully, if you can afford it and find one could be a therapist, but one or two friends. If there's someone older who you can talk to, that's very, very helpful. There wasn't really for me until a certain age, and then but to wander around openly speaking of your wounds to people who are even more wounded than you is a dangerous thing.
Makes sense. So I wanted to talk about something that you mentioned when you said that one of the greatest acts is to have compassion for abusers on a micro level or for oppressors on a macro level. So how may one develop this? And I think the question that I really want to ask is, how can one sustain this? Because
I think it can't be forced. I think a lot of these things are sort of byproducts of the healing process.
Right.
And if you're angry or you hate people who've hurt you or whatever, then do that. Just be aware of it. Just watch it. Be aware that this is what's happening. But you can't stop your emotions. That's impossible. You can't block your emotions. It just, then everything gets very fake, and you sort of, it's pseudo forgiveness and pseudo compassion, and that can get quite dark quite quickly.
Yeah.
So, but I think just being a little careful of projecting that anger onto people is the thing at that point. But when I'm talking about compassion for oppressors, I suppose I'm talking about it as an aspiration. You can have it as an aspiration, even if you're not there yet.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the Tibetan Buddhist, when the kind of Bodhisattva vow, they have an aspiration that all beings will be fully realized and liberated. But that's
Like the
not going to happen
kindness for
tomorrow.
the tortured soul, that, like to have that
Yes.
kindness for them.
No, it's like aspiring to be there is one thing, but actually being there is another. It's making a distinction
Yeah.
between the two. But I
Yeah.
think the reason why it's possible is that you recognize that that people who are doing truly sick acts to other people, that could be you, and you find it in your own psyche, which I actually think is pretty evident. If I look at my own mind, I think I could be anyone else under different circumstances. Yeah.
But then, do you think it's the environment and what happens, or do you think that it's the inherently what is within us that creates the action?
I think the environment is a large part of it, but I think that the person's level of emotional and spiritual development determines how they respond to that environment. But let's not discount the influence of very extreme environments. If you grow up in a very bigoted and right-wing family, it may take you a while to come out.
So what are some of your experiences, or rather your memories of the ages of 0 to 6, the real developmental years, as we call them? Because I know for me, I actually don't even have any memories until actually my memories start after 6. So I wonder what happened back then, but sometimes I don't even question. But I guess, what is your first memory, maybe, or like, how was it back then for you?
Well, I have some quite early memories, 2 and 3. I mean, it's difficult to say, but I certainly, I'm aware that I felt very alone as a child and very scared. Alone, I think, is the real key word. And not able to trust other people. I think that's the key. And I go back to that child a lot in my meditations and therapy and so on. And to give reassurance and let them know that they can trust me now as an adult. But I think that was the core of it, that sense of being very, very frightened and very alone.
And at what point did you actually feel that you discovered that you were alone at that age? And because sometimes we get that realization in our adult life, because when we're a child, sometimes we don't really know what's actually happening, and then we process that.
Yeah, it took me a long time. Yeah, it took me a very long time. I suppose after that first Vipassana course, that was when you're 30, I was 32. So I started to get an idea of it, and that grew through therapy. Therapists would ask me to describe my experience and then would respond. I think the biggest realization I had was when I drank ayahuasca for the second time. And I drank it once in an environment where I didn't feel totally safe and comfortable, so I didn't let go. And maybe the medicine wasn't as strong, but I think it probably was. And then I drank it in another place where I did feel safe. I felt afraid, but I felt safe. I liked the people. It was a smaller, much smaller group. And then I was rocketed back to that place of loneliness and terror as a child, and I just became that child. Um, and it was utterly terrifying. And I realized that was how I'd felt. I knew it. I remembered it, and I knew it. I just hadn't realized I'd been holding on to that in my body or in my mind. I'm not really sure how to phrase it, in the whole structure in my psyche for all of that time. And I was in that place for 2 nights in a row, almost all night, and then again in later ceremonies. And then I learned to navigate it and come out of it. And I learned how to parent my inner child after that. I tried inner child meditations before then, but I never understood it until via ayahuasca I was able to meet that inner child.
You spoke about a book by
John Bradshaw.
Thich Nhat.
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah. Could you maybe share something that you perhaps learned from that, and
I don't know which
also your journey towards Zen,
Zen was never really, but the Thich Nhat Hanh book, I'm not sure which one we're talking about.
I forget the name, but it's the one, the white.
There's Opath White Clouds.
Yes, that's it.
That's his life story of the Buddha.
Okay, that's the one I'm talking about.
Oh, that's a really beautiful book.
Yeah.
No, I thought you were going to talk about John Bradshaw's book. He's got 2. One's called Homecoming or Homegoing, and one's called
this
Shame.
Is the one that you spoke about on your Instagram page. So because we're having this conversation, I thought I can ask you more about it.
Well, that
maybe
very
for someone who wants to hear more about it. So because I think we always go through that journey, right? We kind of identify what went wrong. We go back there, we process it, we identify with the baggage, we let go of the baggage, and then we try to make it better for other people.
To condense most of my life into a sentence.
I mean, that's how it's been for me, so I don't know, but
yeah.
I think that on some level where we can start to have that compassion is when we can recognize, okay, you know what, I have been through similar situations. I see you in that, in the other person. You can say, I see you, and you can be accepting. I think that, because sometimes we've been in similar places in our own lives, and I come from a place where I had my ex-husband who almost broke my back in two, and now I got remarried a couple years ago, and I see things from a totally different perspective. Although I go through similar situations now, but I realize I'm a different person now than I was a decade ago. So, but anyway, coming back to this, the spirituality, I just wanted if you could shed some light on that. Anything that you may have learned.
Well, let me just pick up where we were with the inner child.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that was and Thich Nhat Hanh actually has some really beautiful inner child meditations. Okay. I think he's got one about smiling to yourself as a 5-year-old boy or girl, and smiling to your father when they were 5 years old, and smiling to your mother when she was, and that's a really beautiful one. They're all on the internet, and there's a Plum Village app you can use. I mean, he was probably, of all the people who has lived at the same time as me, I'm saying that because he just died. He's someone I trust absolutely. I think he was very, very wise. But inner child meditation, I scoffed at it a little when I first heard about it, but that's been one of the most powerful tools that I've used. So I would very much recommend that. And the 2 books that have helped with that kind of work, with undoing that kind of childhood shame, were by John Bradshaw, Homegoing or Homecoming, I think maybe it was called, and Healing the Shame That Binds You. And those 2 books helped me to understand how children take on the shame of their parents, and that's the intergenerational trauma, and that clings to you and prevents you from being a person. You sort of think you have no right to exist because you feel so deeply ashamed. And that inner child work it means that that child who feels they're unworthy of love then feels loved, and that's what can really help to transform you from someone who is sort of withering into someone who's confident and
So
self-loving.
I have a question here. So is that love now coming from the adult version of yourself, or is it coming from the imaginary version of your parents?
No, it's the adult version of myself. It's
Exactly.
me
Yeah.
giving love to my child,
Child.
myself
Okay.
as a child,
Exactly.
yeah, who
Okay.
lives on inside my psyche.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think just the just me imagining looking at my mom when she was a child, and because you always see those photographs, and now
Mm.
that we can see photographs, imagine when there was a time where you could not see photographs. But
Mm.
it's yeah, it gives me a good feeling inside if I can try to do that.
Well,
uh
it's also that our parents were also wounded children
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
and
for
still
sure.
are,
Yeah.
perhaps.
uh I have not been able to crack it yet with my father to ask if, if there any wound, but it always gets redirected to, oh, ask your mother. Maybe, but
Well,
maybe one day.
after a point, maybe we don't really need to
You
know
don't
what
need to
happened.
know. You just need to
You know,
be, yeah, yeah, that's true.
you
But
just work with yourself.
yeah, no, for me though, for me, one of the main reasons I really do want to know is for I read somewhere that you kind of, but because it's similar to what you said, it's the person that runs the Happiness Institute, and he also found himself with some gurus in South Asia, and they said that you have to make peace with your parents. So when he actually hugged his parents, he had lost his eyesight, and he actually got it back, and it was considered a medical miracle. But I also feel that even the manifestation of even something like my bipolar, for instance, I think that yes, it may be genetic, but then that genetic thing is also the lived experiences, in essence, of my
Yeah,
ancestors.
right,
So,
right, right,
so that if they experience that, then in a way I experience it, which means that it's the intergenerational trauma. But I
right.
still want to know and unpack what really went on there, because I feel like if I don't quite entirely know it, or at least we can try to talk about not knowing it, then
Mm,
I won't be able to make peace with all the pieces that make me, you know?
mm.
And it's hard to have those conversations with one's parents. But again, like you said, you don't need to do that. It's something
I think you do for a while,
for a while,
and
but
yeah.
we don't need to like do it forever, right? Because it has to be a
Well, you
point
may
where we
reach a
stop
point where you're
talking.
not. Well, you may reach a point where that's it. There's nothing else
There's
to
nothing else.
know,
Exactly. You reach,
mm.
that's true. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Or nothing else that they're going to tell you, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, they're gonna tell you for sure.
and they may be dead and gone. I mean,
Yeah, then it's like, yeah, like my mom made peace with my grandfather. He passed away when she was only 14. So that's when, and it seems he had bipolar, but it was not diagnosed. And but she made peace with it after he passed.
mm,
So through a film that she made on him. So it's like she's trying to do that work as well now. Like, but I find that my mom is doing the same thing that I'm trying to do. But I feel like in a way we're all trying to find that peace. We're trying to find those answers, and whether we look within or without, or with our families or with our friends, we're all trying to find ways to cope, because I feel like we would really, really, a lot of people have become lonely now. It's I just feel that that's why I didn't want to ask you about your books. I'm sure your books are very interesting. It's just that I saw you as a philosopher, and I was like, we have to talk about these topics.
well, I don't really see myself as a philosopher. It's more practical. I
Yeah,
think
but
that's the way I see myself.
you're practicing certain philosophy, sure.
Yes,
But
yes,
at least you can share that, right?
yes.
Okay.
I just want to do whatever works, really.
Yeah,
You
whatever
know.
works. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah. But there was something else I wanted to say, which was that it seems that there's a stage where these conversations are very important, and then there's a stage where you realize it's about your own psyche. Forget about your parents.
Right.
It's about you. So you've got to work with that psyche. And then there's a stage where it becomes less about the specifics of your own trauma than just the fact that you have an ego who is whispering nonsense at you all the time, and that your essence is not that. So that's when the psychotherapeutic becomes spiritual.
It almost doesn't matter like what saying that it doesn't exist, and all that exists is this and the breath and the thought, but then you kind of
it exists in the sense that
I don't know.
Thought, everything exists, I suppose. It exists in the sense that it's there, and you
observe it.
Well, you can hear it.
Yeah.
So it's there, but when you're observing it, the observer is not the ego.
Okay.
There's you are not that voice.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever it's saying.
Okay.
And the pieces in that realization. No.
Going deep. I'm not able to. No, I mean, I am sort of, but I have to like really think about it, and but I'm glad that we're getting that, because I think that these conversations have to be had, even if it's taking it in within the silence, to to take a moment and just have a moment of silence.
Well, the silence is the key word, right? Because the silence is closer to who we are than the noise.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like I experience silence when I'm doing my Indian classical dance. Although I am not like a pro at it, I do it for myself and I enjoy it. But that's just me trying
then we go out into the world
have those moments of silence where I don't have this flow of thoughts. That's my meditation.
But when we're in that moment of silence, then we can see who we are. And then we go out into the world and there's noise everywhere. Yeah. But if we can remember that, then we can remember that we don't have to identify with the noise.
And interact with the noise, basically, in a way.
Or we can interact without identifying as it.
Yes. We can interact with it without it influencing us in a negative way, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. Well, that was a very I didn't know it would lead here, but this is great. I hope that the listeners, I'm not going to edit this, because I think that the way it's so naturally, authentically, the way this conversation has gone out, I think that I just want to sort of end with this. When I had that book, I think I'm still trying to find my order and disorder, and I wanted to have this conversation with you. So my last question to you is going to be, how do you find your own order in disorder?
I'm not sure if I'm looking for order.
You're not. So it's more. Is it more the disorder in the order?
I'm just being here, and life throws up different things at me, and I respond as best I can, I suppose.
So you're not judging it to be order or disorder. You're neutral.
No, not really. No. Everything is disorder. Everything is around disorder.
I know. Disorder. Yeah. Like, who's to say what's order?
Order.
It's like order, right? Who's to say what's order?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by order yet, but if you mean having a sort of stable, balanced life.
Oh no, I think, okay, let me try to. So for me, when I try to, when I use that title, I wasn't really referring exactly to my disorder, although my diagnosis is called bipolar disorder. That it's not a very literal meaning. What I really meant to say is, how do I make sense of myself in this world with all its pain and suffering, but also how I make sense of it and come out of that and detach myself from all of that. And I don't want to sink deep into an abyss constantly. And so, how do I get myself out? But not just getting myself out, but also, in a way, having the recognizing not only when I'm at peace, but really what brings me peace and what I can do to achieve it. And I think these are questions that we might all have at some point, but they're fleeting. So for me,
Well, I suppose.
I don't know, that was a
Hmm,
lot, but
hmm.
yeah, that,
Well, I guess the only thing that I would say is that it's the ability to think less has brought me closer to that position.
mhm.
There's no absolute, and just to be where I'm at, and having a toddler really teaches you to do that. Because if I'm worrying about something, then
Mhm.
I can't be having fun with him. And
So being in the
being with him is
moment, being in the moment.
being in the moment, and being with him is tremendous fun, and he needs me to be having fun with him. And you
Yeah.
just play, and as adults we don't really play that much. Maybe
We've
we play
forgotten
sports,
play.
but
We've forgotten play.
yeah. So
That's,
now I'm playing all the time for hours every day, and not thinking about all this adult stuff, which actually won't really help me that much anyway. If I'm talking about Gaza, I'm making a video about Gaza, I'm learning about, then I'm doing that, right?
right, right.
But otherwise, I'm playing with my 3-year-old, or I'm making dinner, or I'm cleaning the kitchen, or this is basically what my day consists of, things like this. Or I'm taking him to nursery, or I'm reading a novel, and I just want to do that. Otherwise, you can't do anything, because the world
Yeah,
is such a
yeah,
mess
yeah.
that you might start asking yourself questions like, "Who am I to be reading a love story? Who am I to be playing football in the park when children in Gaza can't even go to a park?"
Yes, my
it's
friends. Some of my
right.
friends have experienced this, and I've unfortunately lost a couple of them due to this
Hmm.
dilemma. But I do understand what you're saying when
Well, I
that.
think that's just too much thinking.
Yeah, there
If
is.
you're
There is
doing
too much. Too
something,
much.
do it.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're doing something, then do it. If you're
Do it
otherwise,
fully
do
or
something else.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But all of
It's
this
like that.
rumination
Yeah, yeah. Makes
is, I
sense.
think, that's really what the disorder is the endless rumination, the worrying, the
Mm,
moral questioning, the guilt, the it. And it's easier for me now because I don't have time for rumination. Maybe I did a lot of rumination in my 20s, an enormous amount. But I think meditation can help us not to ruminate. And the one thing that I have this friend of mine, this 87-year-old friend of mine, who gives me advice, and one thing she says is just say, right now, it's like this.
mm.
And you could have every single problem in the world, but right now, I'm here talking to my computer, and it's like this. Right now, I'm sitting on a park bench, I'm looking at the sky, and I'm breathing, and it's like this. And what will happen, and all the traumas of the past are in the past. And that, I suppose, is because I don't have that much time for meditation practice now, or any kind of practice really. But that's something you can practice all the time.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And the
Well,
breath is very helpful with that too,
yeah,
coming
breath,
back to the breath.
concentrating. Yeah.
Just coming back to the breath, it helps you
Yeah,
to recognize that you're here and not in your thoughts.
sure. Uh, I don't want to take too much of your time. I know we've spoken, and I just want to thank you so much. Grateful for having the chance to speak to you and sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience with everybody else. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
yeah.